The rain in Lagos did not merely fall. It descended in heavy, blinding sheets that blurred the taillights of the cars ahead into long, bleeding smears of red. It was past 9 o'clock in the evening. Kwame Mensah gripped the steering wheel of his SUV, his shoulders tense from a grueling 14-hour workday. As the co-founder and majority shareholder of Vanguard Logistics, a rapidly expanding supply chain enterprise, long days were the tax he paid for success. Yet, despite his exhaustion, a quiet sense of pride warmed him. Just that morning, he and his lifelong best friend and business partner, Chidi Okechukwu, had finalized a multi-million naira expansion contract. Kwame rubbed his aching eyes, momentarily distracted by the flash of his dashboard clock. He thought of his wife, Zara, who was waiting at home with a warm dinner. He promised himself that tomorrow he would take a day off. He would leave the office operations entirely in Chidi's capable hands. After all, Chidi wasn't just a partner. He was a brother. When Chidi's previous venture had collapsed years ago, leaving him drowning in debt and ostracized by the corporate community, Kwame had stepped in, cleared his debts, and given him an equal seat at Vanguard's table. As Kwame neared the third mainland bridge, the headlights of an oncoming, overloaded container truck suddenly veered into his lane. The driver had lost control on the slick tarmac. Time dilated. Kwame slammed on the brakes, but the heavy SUV skidded helplessly across the asphalt. There was a deafening screech of tearing metal, the explosive detonation of airbags, and a violent, shattering impact that crushed the front cabin. The world spun into a chaotic vortex of shattered glass, agonizing pain, and then absolute, suffocating darkness. For 3 days, Kwame existed only as a ghost trapped within his own flesh. He could hear things, the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, the hushed whispers of nurses, and the unmistakable, trembling sound of Zara weeping by his bedside. He desperately tried to open his eyes, to reach out his hand, to give some sign that he was still alive inside the tomb of his unresponsive body. But his eyelids felt as though they had been securely welded shut, and his limbs were heavy as lead. The doctors at the St. Nicholas Private Hospital spoke in grave tones about severe cranial trauma and internal bleeding. On the morning of the 4th day, with a Herculean surge of willpower, Kwame finally managed to force his eyelids open. The harsh, sterile white fluorescent light of the intensive care unit pierced his vision, causing a sharp ache to radiate through his skull. "Kwame," Zara cried out, rising instantly from her chair. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face etched with the exhaustion of a 72-hour vigil. She gently caught his weak hand, kissing his knuckles. "Oh, thank God, thank God. Doctor, he's awake." The chief medical consultant, Dr. Alao, stepped into the room shortly after, conducting a brief, thorough examination. He looked down at Kwame with a mixture of relief and solemn professionalism. "You are incredibly lucky to be alive, Mr. Mensah," Dr. Alao said, adjusting his glasses. "The impact fractured 2 of your ribs, caused a moderate concussion, and did significant damage to your right leg. We've stabilized you, but your body requires extensive, uninterrupted rest to heal properly." Kwame's voice was a dry, raspy scratch. My company. I need to get back to the office." "The expansion contract." Dr. Alao offered a firm, unyielding shake of his head. "Absolutely not. You'll be spending at least the next 3 months in this hospital under strict medical supervision and physical therapy. Any premature exertion could cause your internal injuries to rupture. Proper treatment is not optional here, Mr. Mensah." Kwame tried to protest, his mind racing with the logistical demands of Vanguard Logistics, but the sheer effort of speaking drained his remaining energy. He sank back into the pillows, his chest heaving. Zara stroked his forehead, whispering reassurances, but beneath his physical pain, an uneasy, quiet worry began to take root in his mind. The first week of his hospitalization passed in a haze of strong painkillers, physical therapy assessments, and restless sleep. Kwame's condition began to stabilize, and as his mind cleared, his thoughts returned to the one anomaly that he could not rationalize. Chidi had not come to see him. Initially, Kwame excused it. Vanguard Logistics was a massive machine, and with him incapacitated, the entire weight of the multi-millionaire expansion fell squarely on Chitty's shoulders. Chitty was likely working around the clock to reassure clients and manage the fallout of the CEO's sudden absence. But by the second week, the complete lack of communication grew impossible to ignore. Not a single phone call, no text messages, and no visits. "Zara," Kwame asked one afternoon as she poured him a cup of water, "has Chitty called your phone? Has he checked on me through you?" Zara paused, her hands hovering over the nightstand. She kept her face turned away for a moment before looking at him with a troubled expression. "No, Kwame, I haven't heard from him. I tried calling him twice last week to tell him you were awake, but his phone rang out." Kwame frowned, a sharp pang of anxiety tightening his chest. "That makes no sense. Even if the office is upside down, Chitty knows I almost died. He would have come, even if it was at midnight." "Don't stress yourself, please," Zara pleaded, placing a hand on his arm. "The doctor said your blood pressure needs to stay down. Maybe he's traveling for the new contract." As the days bled into weeks, Kwame's worry transformed into a heavy, suffocating dread. By the end of the first month, he was strong enough to sit up and hold his own smartphone. He dialed Chitty's primary number. "The number you're trying to call is currently switched off. Please try again later." He tried Chitty's secondary line. It rang continuously until it went to voicemail. He sent dozens of urgent WhatsApp messages, watching the single gray check marks remain stubbornly undoubled day after day. He called the office landline. It rang, but nobody answered. The silence was a physical weight in the sterile hospital room. Kwame began to feel a deep, burning frustration. He was trapped in a hospital bed, his right leg encased in a heavy cast, unable to do anything but stare at a silent screen. The person he had pulled out of the gutters of financial ruin, the man he called his brother, had vanished into thin air when Kwame needed him most. "Something is wrong, Zara," Kwame muttered fiercely one evening, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and growing anger. "This isn't about work. Chitty is avoiding me. The office is avoiding me." "What do you want to do, Kwame?" Zara asked, her own anxiety mirroring his. "Tomorrow morning, go to the Vanguard headquarters," Kwame instructed, his eyes burning with intent. "Don't call. Just go there. Demand to see Chitty. Find out what is happening with the company and why my lines of communication have been completely cut off." Zara nodded quietly, promising she would do exactly as he asked. The next afternoon, Kwame sat rigidly in his bed, counting the minutes. The hospital clock ticked loudly, each stroke sounding like a countdown. When the door finally clicked open, Zara walked in. Her face was pale, her lower lip trembling, and her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and humiliation. Kwame's heart hammered against his ribs. "Zara, what happened? Did you see Chitty?" Zara dropped her purse onto the chair, her voice shaking. "Kwame, I wasn't even allowed past the reception gates. The security team at the main entrance blocked me." Kwame stared at her, uncomprehending. "Blocked you? They know you. Chief Security Officer Benson knows exactly who you are. You've been to the office 100 times. "Benson wasn't there," Zara said, a tear finally escaping her eye. "The guards were completely new faces. They told me that strict orders had been passed down from executive management. They said no unauthorized personnel, including family members of former staff, were permitted on the premises without a prior written appointment. They treated me like a criminal trespasser, Kwame. They escorted me to the street." The word "former" echoed in Kwame's ears like a thunderclap. "Former staff," Kwame roared, his voice booming across the small hospital room. A violent surge of adrenaline tore through him, and he instinctively tried to swing his legs out of bed, only to be stopped by a blinding flash of agony from his injured leg. He collapsed back against the mattress, gasping for air, his face flushed deep red. The worry that had plagued him for a month crystallized into a pure, concentrated rage. His mind spun in a chaotic loop of confusion and betrayal. What could possibly be happening? Had Chitty staged a corporate coup? How could he lock out the wife of the man who owned 60% of the company? Every theory he formulated seemed more absurd than the last. Yet the cold reality of Zara being turned away at the gate was undeniable. For the remaining 2 months of his hospitalization, Kwame stopped calling Chitty. He stopped sending messages. The desperation left him, replaced entirely by a cold, calculating anger. Every day during his excruciating physical therapy sessions, as he forced his damaged leg to move, he channeled that rage into fuel. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering how Chitty had wept in his living room 5 years ago, begging for a lifeline when his creditors threatened to jail him. Kwame had given him a job, shares, respect, and a second chance at life. How does a man turn into a monster? Kwame wondered. He forced himself to control his outward outbursts, knowing that a relapse would only prolong his stay in the hospital. He needed to be out. He needed to be on his feet. Exactly 3 months after the near-fatal accident, Dr. Allow reluctantly signed Kwame's discharge papers. While his ribs had healed and his concussion symptoms had vanished, his right leg remained weak, requiring him to walk with the assistance of a sturdy, silver-topped cane. "Take it easy, Mr. Mensah," the doctor warned. "You are better, but you're not yet fully fit for strenuous activity. No stress." Kwame thanked the doctor, but the moment he stepped out into the warm Lagos air, his mind was singular in its focus. He spent the first 2 weeks at home, undergoing final homebound physiotherapy sessions, regaining his stamina, and letting the storm inside him build into a quiet, controlled force. He wanted to ensure that when he finally confronted Chitty, he could stand on his own 2 feet, literally and figuratively. On a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days after his discharge, Kwame dressed in a sharp, tailored navy blue suit. He looked at himself in the mirror. He was leaner now, his face hardened by the ordeal, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. He took his cane in his right hand and walked down to his car. Zara offered to drive him, but he declined. This was a walk he needed to take alone. He drove through the familiar routes of the commercial district, his grip tight on the steering wheel. When the grand, glass-fronted architectural marvel that was the Vanguard Logistics headquarters came into view, his chest tightened. He had designed the layout of this building himself. He had signed the lease. He had watched the company name get bolted onto the concrete structure in gleaming silver letters. He wanted to park his car in his designated CEO slot, only to find a sleek, black luxury sedan already parked there. Kwame narrowed his eyes, stepped out of his car, and walked toward the main glass sliding doors, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. As he approached the entrance, 2 tall, burly security guards in unfamiliar black uniforms stepped into his path, blocking the doorway. "Good morning, sir," one of the guards said, his tone devoid of warmth. "State your business and show your identification badge." Kwame held his ground, leaning slightly on his cane, his voice dripping with authority. "Move out of my way. I'm Kwame Mensah. I don't need a badge to enter a building I built." The guards exchanged a brief look, but their expressions remained completely blank. "We have no Kwame Mensah on our active employee roster, sir. You cannot enter without an official appointment." Kwame felt a vain throb in his temple. He looked past them into the lobby. The receptionist was a stranger. The familiar faces of the front desk staff he had known for years were completely gone. He looked around the courtyard. Even the maintenance crew had been replaced. "Where is Chief Security Officer Benson?" Kwame demanded, his voice rising. "Where is Ton from marketing? Call Chitty Okechukwu down here right now." "Sir, please lower your voice, or we will be forced to escort you off the property," the second guard warned, his hand moving closer to his utility belt. "Mr. Okechukwu does not take unscheduled walk-in visitors. Furthermore, if you're looking for the previous administration, they were all laid off 2 months ago during the corporate restructuring." Kwame's heart did a sickening drop. "Restructuring? What are you talking about? I am a majority shareholder of this company." A middle-aged man in a sharp gray suit, carrying a clipboard, walked out of the lobby toward the commotion. It was the new human resources director, a man Kwame had never seen in his life. "Is there a problem here?" the director asked, looking at Kwame with analytical eyes. "Are you in charge here?" Kwame asked, fighting to keep his voice steady despite the roaring in his ears. "Tell these men who I am." I am Kwame Mensah, the co-founder of Vanguard Logistics. The director's expression softened slightly, changing from annoyance to a look of profound pity. It was a look that chilled Kwame to his very bones. "Ah, Mr. Mensah," the director said quietly. "I see. Look, sir, I understand this must be an incredibly difficult situation for you, but you cannot be here. Vanguard Logistics no longer exists under its old structure. The company has been entirely bought out by a new sole owner." The world seemed to stop spinning. The sounds of the Lagos traffic faded into an eerie hum. "Bought out," Kwame whispered, his voice suddenly hollow. "That's impossible. I own 60% of the shares. I haven't sold a single fraction of this company. Who bought it?" "The sale was finalized 2.5 months ago, sir," the director explained, glancing at his clipboard. "It was a legally sealed and binding acquisition agreement between the new entity and the previous management. The entire asset portfolio, brand name, and intellectual property were legally transferred." "Who is the new owner?" Kwame demanded, his hand gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Give me the name." The director sighed, checking a document. "The purchasing entity is Apex Holdings, whose sole proprietor and managing director is Mr. Chidioka Chukwu. He bought out all assets and registered himself as the sole owner. According to the corporate filings, the previous partnership was dissolved by mutual consent. Now, please leave, Mr. Mensah, before we have to call the police." Kwame did not hear the rest of the director's words. The world went completely gray. Chidi hadn't just abandoned him in the hospital. Chidi had stolen his life. He turned around slowly, his legs feeling like lead weight, and walked back to his car. The drive home was a blur. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't look at the scenery. He drove in an absolute, terrifyingly quiet state of shock. His mind, usually so sharp and analytical, completely refused to process the magnitude of the betrayal. How could a sealed agreement exist? How could his shares be gone? When he finally walked through the front door of his house, Zara took one look at his ghostly, hollow expression and knew the worst had happened. "Kwame," she whispered, rushing to him. "What did you find out?" Kwame sat heavily on the sofa, his cane clattering to the floor. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, not with tears, but with a terrifying, silent rage. "Chidi sold the company," Kwame said, his voice a deathly whisper. "He bought it himself through a shell company. He completely pushed me out while I was lying unconscious in that hospital bed. According to them, I signed everything away." Zara gasped, covering her mouth. No, that's impossible. You were in a coma. Then you were heavily medicated. How would you sign anything?" "I don't know," Kwame snarled, his eyes snapping open, burning with a lethal fire. "But I will find out." Zara knelt beside him, her expression hardening into absolute determination. "Don't fight him with your hands, Kwame. And don't let anger destroy your health. Call Tariq immediately. Inform your lawyer." Kwame took a deep, shuddering breath, pulling himself back from the brink of emotional collapse. Zara was right. Rage without strategy was useless. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number he knew by heart, and waited. "Kwame, my brother," the voice of Tariq Al-Hassan, his longtime corporate attorney, boomed through the speaker. "I've been trying to reach you. I heard about the horrific accident, but every time I called the office, Chidi told me you were in an isolated recovery wing abroad and couldn't receive calls. How are you?" Kwame smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Tariq, I was never abroad. I've been at St. Nicholas Hospital right here in Lagos for 3 months. And Chidi has stolen Vanguard Logistics." There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. "What did you just say?" Tariq's voice lost all its warmth, instantly shifting into the tone of a seasoned, aggressive legal predator. "I need to see you tomorrow morning." "Tariq," Kwame said clearly. "First thing, I'm going to war. Be in my office at 8 o'clock sharp," Tariq replied grimly. "Bring every single scrap of paper you have left." The law offices of Al-Hassan and Associates sat high up in a glittering skyscraper in Victoria Island. The next morning, Kwame and Zara sat across from Tariq in a spacious, wood-paneled conference room. The table was covered with corporate registries, bank statements, and the initial incorporation documents of Vanguard Logistics. Tariq, a tall man of Sierra Leonean and Nigerian descent known for his brutal efficiency in commercial litigation, paced the room, reviewing a certified true copy of a new corporate filing he had pulled from the Corporate Affairs Commission (CAC) database just an hour prior. "This is bad, Kwame, but it is not irreversible," Tariq said, tossing the document onto the table. According to these official filings, a series of share transfer forms and a comprehensive resolution of the board were filed exactly 2 weeks after your accident. The documents bear your exact signature, fully authorizing the sale and transfer of your 60% controlling stake to Chitty's shell company, Apex Holdings, for a nominal fee. Kwame slammed his palm onto the table. "It's a forgery. I was barely conscious 2 weeks after the accident. I was heavily drugged on morphine and intensive painkillers at St. Nicholas." "I know that, and you know that," Tariq said calmly, sitting down across from him. "But on paper, the signatures look identical to your standard corporate signature. Chitty didn't just scribble your name. He used an expertly executed replication or something else. Furthermore, he filed a notarized affidavit claiming you signed these documents in full mental capacity right before your accident, and that the filing was simply delayed due to administrative backlog." Tariq leaned forward, locking his eyes with Kwame's. "Do not worry, my friend. We will get your company back. But you must understand me. This will not be a quick settlement. Chitty has deep pockets now, funded by your own company's revenue. He has hired a high-priced legal team to defend this structure. This is going to be a fierce, exhausting battle. It will take time. Are you ready for this?" Kwame leaned back in his chair, his cane resting against his knee. The anger that had consumed him for weeks had settled into something far more dangerous, a calm, unyielding resolve. "Tariq, that company was built with my blood, sweat, and tears," Kwame said, his voice steady and resolute. "I started it when I had nothing but a laptop and a dream. I brought Chitty in out of pity. If it takes me the rest of my life, I will take back what is mine, and I will see him ruin himself." "File the lawsuit." The legal battle began the following week with a comprehensive writ of summons charging Chitty Okechukwu and Apex Holdings with corporate fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and illegal conversion of assets. The war of the two friends instantly became the talk of the West African business community. Headlines in financial newspapers screamed, "Vanguard Logistics torn apart. Co-founder accuses partner of trillion-naira sickbed betrayal." Chitty's legal defense team hit back with vicious force. They filed counterclaims, alleging that Kwame was suffering from post-traumatic mental instability due to his brain injury and that he was trying to extort Chitty after willingly selling his shares to fund his medical treatments abroad. They introduced signed receipts, heavily altered corporate minutes, and character witnesses who claimed Kwame had long wanted out of the logistics business. The first year of the litigation was a grueling saga of procedural delays, technical objections, and endless preliminary hearings. Chitty's lawyers used every loophole in the judicial system to stall the trial, hoping to bleed Kwame financially and break his spirit. Kwame watched his savings dwindle as the legal fees mounted. There were days when the emotional stress was so heavy that his physical injuries flared up, leaving him writhing in pain from his damaged leg. There were nights when he sat in the dark, watching Zora balance their household budget, wondering if he was destroying his family's future to chase a ghost. But whenever he felt his resolve waver, he remembered the image of the security guards blocking his wife from entering the gate, and the memory of Chitty's total silence while he lay broken in the ICU. He kept moving forward, attending every single court hearing, sitting quietly in the gallery, his eyes fixed on Chitty, who sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, surrounded by expensive lawyers, completely refusing to make eye contact with his former benefactor. As the lawsuit entered its second year, the tide finally began to turn. Tariq's relentless investigative team dug deep into the digital forensics of the disputed transaction. The breakthrough came during a grueling cross-examination of the company's former corporate secretary, a woman named Funmi. who had been abruptly dismissed and given a massive severance package right after Chitty took full control. Tariq had tracked her down to her new home in Ghana and served her with an international subpoena. On a hot Tuesday morning, the courtroom was packed to maximum capacity as Funmi took the witness stand. Under Tariq's sharp, unyielding questioning, her composure shattered. Tears streaming down her face, she confessed to the court. "I didn't forge the signature." Funmi sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at Chitty, who sat at the defense table, his face suddenly turning a sickly shade of ash. "Mr. Okechukwu brought the documents to me. He didn't forge Kwame's signature either. He tricked him." The courtroom erupted into a loud hum of whispers. The judge rapped his gavel sharply. "Order in this court. Witness, clarify your statement." Funmi wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. 6 months before the accident, during the initial phases of the multi-million naira expansion contract, Mr. Okechukwu gave Kwame a massive stack of routine procurement and customs clearing documents to sign. Kwame trusted him implicitly. He used to sign hundreds of pages a day based on Chitty's word. Hidden deep inside that stack, on page 47 and 82, were the blank share transfer forms and the undated board resolution. Kwame signed them thinking they were standard shipping authorizations for the expansion project. Chitty held onto those signed pages for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to execute them. A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. Kwame sat up straight, his heart pounding. The missing puzzle piece had finally fallen into place. It hadn't happened in the hospital. The trap had been laid months before, built entirely on his absolute, unwavering trust in his best friend. The accident had simply provided Chitty with a perfect, uninterrupted 3-month window to file the stolen documents, fire the loyal staff, and lock down the company before Kwame could ever discover the deception. Tariq immediately moved to introduce the expert testimony of a forensic document examiner and a digital auditor. They presented comprehensive metadata from Vanguard's internal servers, proving that the transfer documents had been digitally compiled using pages signed months prior to the date listed on the filing. Furthermore, the hospital records clearly proved Kwame was medically incapable of executing any legal agreements on the day Chitty claimed the transaction occurred. The legal defense of Chitty Okechukwu crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. 2 months after Funmi's explosive confession, the day of final judgment arrived. The courtroom was dead silent as Justice Folashade Adebayo delivered her comprehensive 2-hour ruling. She meticulously, systematically dismantled Chitty's defense, labeling his actions as a masterclass in corporate malice, driven by unparalleled greed and a monstrous betrayal of human trust. Justice Adebayo looked over her glasses, her eyes locking onto Chitty, who stood trembling in the dock. "This court finds that the plaintiff, Kwame Mensah, never intended to sell, transfer, or divest his interests in Vanguard Logistics," the judge announced, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "The documents relied upon by the defense are hereby declared null, void, and a product of grand fraudulent misrepresentation." The judge turned a page, her expression hardening. "The Corporate Affairs Commission is hereby ordered to immediately restore Mr. Kwame Mensah's 60% ownership stake and reinstate him as the rightful chairman and chief executive officer of Vanguard Logistics. All assets, revenues, and profits generated by Apex Holdings under the guise of Vanguard Logistics over the past 2 years are to be fully audited and returned to the plaintiff with interest." Justice Adebayo paused, looking at Chitty with undisguised disdain. "Furthermore, the cross-criminal complaints of forgery, perjury, and grand corporate theft are fully sustained. For your calculated, malicious actions which sought to completely ruin a man who saved you from financial oblivion, and for perpetrating a massive fraud upon the state, this court sentences you, Chitty Okechukwu, to 20 years in a maximum security correctional facility, to be served without the option of a fine." The courtroom erupted into an absolute frenzy of cheers and flashing cameras. Chitty collapsed forward against the wooden railing of the dock, burying his face in his hands as prison wardens stepped forward, their heavy metal handcuffs clicking loudly around his wrists. Kwame sat completely still in his chair. He didn't cheer. He didn't shout. He felt a profound, overwhelming wave of relief wash over him, washing away 2 years of agonizing pain, sleepless nights, and burning rage. He looked across the courtroom one last time as the wardens led a weeping, broken Chitty away through the back door. There was no joy in seeing his former friend ruined, but there was a deep, unshakable sense of divine justice. Zara threw her arms around his neck, weeping tears of pure joy. Tarek patted his shoulder firmly, a victorious smile stretching across his face. Kwame picked up his silver-topped cane and stood up on his own 2 feet. He walked out of the courthouse, stepping into the warm, bright Lagos sunshine. The battle was finally over. His body had healed, his name had been cleared, and his company was waiting for him. He was ready to go back to work. If you find this story meaningful, kindly like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories updates. Also, what lesson did you learn from this story? We would like to know in the comments. Thank you for watching.